So yeah, my name is Jackson Dion. I'm the executive director of Indigenous Wellness Training Society, and we're here to conduct a series of interviews regarding the 60 Scoop, which is governmental policies that led to a large number of Indigenous children, about 20,000 in Canada, being removed from their families and placed in non-Indigenous care. And we'd like to thank the National 60 Scoop for allowing us to be able to do this work. And we have here today with us Melissa. Maybe you wanted to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Melissa Thomas. My name that I was given was Melissa Sigvaldason, and it's like it's an Icelandic last name.
Oh, cool. Yeah, yeah. So, where, where, so what was your experience with the 60 Scoop?
So I was one of the late 60s scoopers. I was born in 85. And I was in CFS for a few years, and then I got adopted by a family a few hours from Winnipeg. So I grew up on a farm. And then in the past about 10 years, I've just been getting more connected with my roots, and I went on DNA Ancestry, and I connected with some cousins there, and I went up to my community. So I've been connecting with them, but I just, my main thing right now is just figuring out who my birth father is, because there's no records, and my birth mom unfortunately passed away. So I don't have a way to talk to her, get information really about who my birth dad is. So that's the challenging part that I'm going through right now.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So were you born in Manitoba?
Yeah, I'm from Manitoba. I live in Winnipeg. I was just born, I think I was born in Winnipeg. That's what it says on the records that I got. So, yeah. And I just, I have 2 kids now, and I'm married.
Nice. Yeah. So did you have something to share?
Yeah, so I just wanted to read this passage. I was a part of a book about the 60 Scoop, which is so cool, and I feel so honored and thrilled that I can share this with you. But it's called Radiance and Reflections of the 60 Scoop, Silence to Strength, and it's edited by Christine Misinoke Smith. So this is my little part, and it's called Rainy Days. So I'm going to read it for you.
Sure.
There are many rainy days growing up as an Indigenous adoptee. On these types of gloomy days, maybe I would be asked a weird question by a well-meaning stranger, or maybe it was in school when we had to discuss our heritage. It was on these days where I felt different and I felt like an outsider. I would feel bad about being adopted, about not knowing my family or where they were. But on these days, they gave me time to reflect and think quietly about my life. Many thoughts would go through my head. I would think about my biological parents and about how they didn't want me. I felt like there was something missing from my life, and I felt like there was something wrong with me. I focused too often on what happened to me, and at times, it really made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. Now that I want to share my story about my life that I was given and what I did to overcome those hard rainy days. My life began as a baby in child family services. My birth mother lived in a foster care home at the young age of 15. My birth mother tried to make things work while taking care of me, but she wasn't able to. She gave me up for adoption. I had one picture of her that was included in my adoption records. It was on her day that she said goodbye to me. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying, but she looked at me with a big round face, and she had the same long fingers and large hands as me. There was a large picture of her holding me on her lap. She died in her 40s before I ever got to see her again. My Birth mother had substance abuse struggles. I often wish that I had been able to see her, even just once. There is little information about how she died and where she went after she had left me. The most devastating part is not getting to know my birth mother. Can you ever imagine not seeing your mother and trying to comprehend how many moments were missed? I was eventually adopted into a welcoming and loving family. I grew up on a big farm and I have lots of memories of playing outside. I had a horse and had lots of cats and dogs. There isn't even a huge creek for me to play in each day. My adopted parents loved me as if I was their own biological child. I was the youngest of two older siblings. My adopted family is of Icelandic and Ukrainian German descent. My sister and my brother were good to me and they treated me well as I grew up. I went to school in a predominantly white community with little to no exposure to my cultural background. I belonged to the community, but I still felt like I stood out compared to everyone else. Then, every once in a while, I had sad days where I would reflect on being adopted. Sometimes the reflections began as a trickle and then turned into a thunderstorm. I badly wanted to fit in with my family and friends, and I wished that I was white. I would tell people I was Métis because that was what was listed on my adoption papers, but deep down I knew I was full-blooded Native. I always looked at my adoption papers with my mom, and I would talk about them with her. I would cry because I was so angry at my birth mother for giving me up for adoption without even a letter to say goodbye. It took me a long time to see that she was just a child herself and to come in terms with the grief I was feeling. I remember telling my adoptive mom that when I was older and rich, I would buy white skin for myself. I was so dark when I was little, and even though people didn't exactly say I was different, I knew I was different and acted different than more people around me. When I was in kindergarten, I came home crying from school one day because a girl said she didn't want to sit beside me because I was a dirty Indian. I didn't realize that how I could change this about myself, and I wish that I could be the same as everybody else. I had always had an Icelandic last name, and it became a ritual opening for people to ask me, "What's the story behind your Icelandic last name?" They would ask me because I was deep brown in skin color. I always said, "Oh, I'm adopted." And then they would laugh and say, "Oh, okay, now that makes sense." Knowing that I was adopted and being questioned about it really hurt my feelings and embarrassed me because it always happened in front of strangers. I didn't get a chance to tell my story in my terms. We as a society try to see everyone in tiny boxes that require checking off to understand them. Another challenging part of being adopted was having no biological ties to my adopted family. I didn't have the same nose or their smaller frame. My adopted family had similar taste in food, and they would all be good at one thing like baseball. They would always be talking about what it meant to be Icelandic or German and Ukrainian. They would include me in their cultural teachings and jokes because they viewed me as their biological child, but I wasn't in the same category. It was confusing to me because it made me question who I was, what I liked, and what I didn't like. I equated rainy days with my sadness and confusion when people would come up and ask me what my mom and dad did for work or when Father's Day came up. I knew I had two moms and two dads. I didn't want to explain it or even explore it, so I just pushed it down and kept on going with my adopted parents being my primary focus. When I became older and I didn't feel like I felt fit in or when things weren't working out for me, I would pray and talk to my birth mother and I would say, "Why did you do this to me? Why wasn't I good enough? How could you be so cold-hearted, leaving a baby alone forever?" I would end up crying myself to sleep. I remember my adopted family telling me that I was their child and I was meant to be with them. They would always say they chose me and I was special because they chose me out of all the other children in the world. On those days, my parents would cheer me up enough so I was able to go on with my life. When I went to the city to go to university, I was 17 and naive when it came to things like riding a bus or buying groceries. I lived with my best friend, who was my older cousin, and she helped me get around the city. I truly don't know how I would have gotten through my life without her love and guidance. She is someone that will always be on my side. I eventually became comfortable working and living in the city on my own. It was during this experience in university I noticed that I was different compared to most students. I felt like they were more fortunate than me, and it often made me feel like I was not good enough. I would experience racism in the class when everyone would turn to ask me for answers during the one or two classes where we talked about Indigenous education, or when they would say demeaning things to me about Indigenous people. The other soon to be teachers would ask me for support for lesson plans, and it was challenging to be called upon when I was just learning about Indigenous education education myself. I felt that I had lost my Indigenous education connection that I would have received from my birth parents, or at least somebody in my biological family or school. I overcome this loss by attending different classes on Indigenous ceremonies, ribbon skirt making workshops, beading moccasins, and birchwork biting. I have been lucky enough to know some elders, and they have included me in sweats and sundance ceremonies. After some time, I went on to receive 4 degrees from university. I have a Master's of Education degree, a post-bachelorette degree, an education degree, a Bachelor Arts degree. I never received any funding for school because I wasn't a status Indian. My adopted family supported me in my schooling. I'm proud of myself for finishing my degrees because I worked so hard on them. And but I also felt like I let down my ancestors. I did not want them to look down on me for not living a traditional Native life. I decided to become a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher because I wanted all kids to get opportunities in life. Currently, I'm teaching kindergarten and have been teaching for 12 years. I've taught many young brown faces like mine once was. I feel at ease being with them, and I know that they are all my relations. It seems like this generations of kids are taught more about Indigenous education and what the traditional ways of being are. It brings me peace and comfort knowing that things like the residential schools, treaties, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the 60 scoop are being discussed in school. It's important for us to learn about our history. Eventually, it was having my own children that helped me. Having children of my own and seeing myself in them is nothing short of amazing. They are smart and they are proud of who they are, what they look like, and often tell people they are Native. I talk to them about my story and I talk to them about Indigenous knowledge and stories. I want them to never go bed crying, wishing they were different. They will always be loved in the same way I was, but they will not carry the same huge burden I faced while being adopted and with people who didn't look like me and didn't know my culture. It is in my hope that by sharing my story, it will help others realize that even though there are rainy days, there will always be something good just around the corner. We learn from the hard days and they shape us into the people we are meant to be. Remember, there's always a rainbow after the storm. And that's part of my story.
Wow, yeah, it's very insightful, I think,
Yeah,
going,
I love it. It's like so meaningful for me to share it.
yeah, so like so if you were to reflect on it, what is what's the story about? What is,
What is the story about?
yeah, yeah.
So I think just learning to get through the hard times so that you can focus on making yourself a better person.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's a gist of like I've done a few of these interviews, and that's basically some bad things happened, when we were born. Like I'm a 60 scoop survivor too. Then then we kind of like, so a lot of people fell into addictions, and then they got themselves out, and then they started working mostly on their culture and identity.
Hmm.
Mm. Would you say, because I think you mentioned your culture?
Yeah, culture is very important because that's how we're going to heal ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, I think so too. Like I think that culture is a little bit different in Manitoba.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think every area is a little bit different.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think you pretty much covered the. So you did your experience of being scooped, and I understand that too about just wondering about the biological parents. I was basically adopted at 3 weeks old, and then so I basically had two sets of parents. So my adopted parents and my biological parents, and I think my mom passed away when I was fairly young as well too, and I think she was related to my adopted mom, and like I didn't know too much about death at the time, but just seeing the reaction of my adopted mom when my biological mom passed away was really something that I think that affected me more than anything.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's not easy.
Yeah. So so who wrote the book? Like who did they write it for? Is it written for?
I don't know what it was written for, but yeah, it was edited by Christine Misinoki Smith. Looks
Oh,
like,
nice.
yeah.
So does she tell the reason why she wrote the book,
Um, I'll just check.
or even what was the reason that you included the story? Or
Well, this is what she just wrote. It says Silence is Strength is a writing platform that I wanted to offer other 60 Scoop survivors because I wanted them to see through that story. We can offer the mainstream public a chance to hear about how assimilation policies have impacted the Indigenous peoples of Canada. I also wanted to be able to assist other survivors going from silence and keeping our stories inside to strength by telling our stories to show that it's possible to move forward with our healing.
hmm, wow,
Well, that's what she said.
yeah, must have been a lot of work I think went into that book. Like
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just sitting here interviewing people, and I don't know. It for me, it is good. Like just hearing everyone's stories, and because like say, have you read the book? That book?
Yes, most of it. I
Oh,
have like, I think I have like one story left to do.
oh yeah, because we hear about like say the stories about things that happen either in residential schools or even the 60s group, but I think as I don't know if you found out from the book, as I'm finding out, is you hear about things, but then actually being hearing it directly from people who experienced it is quite makes it come alive or something, makes it real.
Yeah, no, I get you. It's good to hear these stories. It's good to tell well, what we went through.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Is there something that you would like to the community to know about anything about the 60s group?
Just that we're here and we're a society and we're trying to heal ourselves and to reach out if you need any help or more community.
Yeah, on our website there we have some resources individuals can
Yeah.
access for reaching out. Yeah, and yeah, I really appreciate your openness and your courage to be able
Yeah.
to share your story.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah. You're the first one who has been in a book, in a sense,
Yeah.
yeah, about the 60 scoop, which is really great.
Yeah. That's good.
And you basically covered all the points, like where you're at currently, your hopes
Mhm.
and aspirations for the Indigenous community as a whole. And yeah, I like doing this. I like hearing the different stories from different avenues, and yeah, I'm grateful that your story made a book, and that's basically why I want to do these things. Is so let's share our stories and make in a sense a permanent record. You know, so with your story being in a book, then it becomes more permanent because I think future generations need to hear these.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, do whatever they can to avoid the things that we got ourselves into or something.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my journey. Could follow it sort of if you want to, but this is where I ran into trouble. I hope you don't get into trouble, but if you do get into trouble, just know, like you said, you could get out, and there is hope, and you just have to keep going. And may
Mm-hmm.
not make sense at the moment, but in the future, it'll make sense, and you'll be able to turn that challenge into a strength.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you'd like to share anything else or.
No, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I'll just push the end stream here then, and just give me a minute.